So while I promised I wouldn't always do Dave Ramsey react videos, I found a video that is not by Dave Ramsey, but Dave Ramsey is in it. So we're going to check it out because this video, as it turns out, is probably one of the best arguments for what I've been saying here on this channel against Dave Ramsey this entire time. So you're going to have to watch it to see why this is such an amazing admission to, you know, I'm just gonna pretend that he just straight up said, go like and subscribe to Wealthy Idiots. I'm going to pretend that's what he said because it's basically that. Let's check it out.
Do you say debt is bad because for the average person, that is a good principle to live by? And with that, I kind of agree with you. However, if people do utilize debt in an effective way, such as Graham, he's very responsible, very well researched on, you know, the markets and how he can leverage his money with debt. Do you think that that is a more effective way to grow fast if you're calculated with it?
To answer his question, if I'm going to pretend like he asked me the question, I wouldn't say that it's an effective way to grow your wealth fast. Everything is still slow, but I would say that it's faster than otherwise. Like if you weren't to use leverage at all, it would be much, much slower. A good example is what we talked about with, when real estate investing and you put in, let's say the house increases in value 4% and you bought the whole house. So if you bought the whole house for $100,000, it goes up 4%. You made $4,000. That's 4% return on your money. It's not great. 4%, like right now, it's not even beating inflation. So let's say you put a down payment down to $25,000 and you borrowed the rest from the bank and the house grew at a 4%. So it appreciated 4%. That's $4,000. If you only put 25% down, that's $25,000. And $4,000 of $25,000 is 16%. So your money, because you get to keep all the appreciation, all $4,000, the bank gets none of that, and you only put $25,000 down, you get a 16% return on your money. So it's a much, much better return. 16% doesn't mean you're like wealthy tomorrow or even the next day. It just means that compounding year over year, it's going to be greater in the long run. So I wouldn't say that it's fast. I would say that it is faster than not doing it. And then his statement about, if you're, for most people taking out debt, because if you're taking out consumer debt, you can't handle having a credit card. This isn't the plan for you. But if you can, if you are an investor, you're smart with your money, you are able to handle debt, and you can actually look at the information to make the right decision, why wouldn't debt make sense here, right? And I think that's a valid question because I've asked that all the time, and Dave's going to give us a great answer.
It is a more effective way to grow fast if that's your goal. But what people leave out of the discussion is that you've increased your risk exponentially. More debt equals more risk, period.
I think that's interesting that he said that because we often complain here that Dave often says debt is risk. And we give the example of if you're over here and it's conservative and then all of a sudden you take out $1 worth of debt, Dave is like, it's all over here. It's the top risky. And we're like, isn't it kind of on a spectrum? Couldn't we take out debt and still be in this conservative space? And he kind of admits that here. He says, more debt equals more risk. I still don't think that that's true because if we have a $50,000 income and we have $50,000 worth of debt, that's a lot of risk. If we have $1 million worth of income and we have $100,000 worth of debt, we have more debt technically, but I would say that's a lot less risky. But then the inverse is that would mean less debt equals less risk, right? So if we can reduce the amount of debt that we have while still taking out enough to make sure that we get good returns, maybe that's more on the conservative side. Kind of agreeing with what we argue here, that this whole thing is actually on a scale.
After I went broke, I had to analyze and go, okay, what went wrong here? And because I had never lost money on a flip. I was not behind on the notes. They just called them. They had the ability to do that because it was commercial paper. It wasn't traditional mortgages. It was 90-day paper.
So Dave here admits that he didn't use standard mortgages. He used flip loans, which is not the same thing. And I don't think that he's ever said anywhere, including in this video here, if he knew that these loans could be called back at any time, right? I don't think he's said that if he knew that and he risked it anyways. I don't know. But it is interesting to note that he had a specific plan that failed. that one plan failed, and then he swung all the way over to the other side of being like, everything in between is now also not legitimate to do. So like in my case, if I'm buying investment properties and I use conventional mortgages, which I do, and I put down a pretty significant down payment, my concern is making that monthly payment. I have to make sure I can make that monthly payment, and I have to make sure I make it even if I don't collect all the income from the people that are staying there. In Dave's plan, he had to ensure that he covered all the debt, like every dollar, and he didn't have it because at the time, and he says he was 100% leveraged, right? So he didn't have any of that money. So these two things don't really equate to each other.
What it amounted to was, I had proven track record of making money. I mean, I probably owned 2,000 pieces of real estate in my life. And so I was doing a lot of flips. And some of them I was doing in 24 hours. I would just buy them and flip them to another investor and make 10 grand and keep walking, that kind of stuff. So, but I was doing 100% financed. I didn't put any money in it.
So is it possible to do a real estate plan without doing flips and without doing these financed flip loans? Yes, it is. It's totally possible. In fact, we don't teach what Dave did before on this channel. We teach a much more conservative approach to real estate investing than even a lot of people not using Dave's method teach. So this seems like a classic case of like, I went extreme surfing. Have you seen those videos where those people are like on mega waves and they have like a jet ski pulling them on these mega waves, and they could essentially die if they screw up. So they're doing this extreme surfing, and then they failed. And then they come back to the beach and they tell everyone, nobody's allowed to go in the water anymore. Right? That's a terrible idea. There's risk in the water. And all the surfers who are just like riding the waves that are coming in on the beach are like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, there's risk to surfing, but like, we're just riding these waves. Like, no one gets seriously injured out here. Like, why would you come and tell us that? That's how this feels. It's like we're doing really conservative things with real estate investing. Dave screwed up tremendously by doing some crazy stuff. And then he comes to us and he has the audacity to tell us that what we're doing isn't safe and we shouldn't be doing it. Or in some cases, he calls people just plain stupid on his show who do and say the things that we say. So that's just crazy to me. But, we got more to go.
And so after I crashed, I kind of had to go through a CSI, an autopsy, and go, okay, why did the patient die?
Well, the patient died because you had all these loans out that got recalled that you couldn't pay. So it would stand to reason that maybe if you were to do this again, you wouldn't take those same loans out. Maybe you would take loans out that can't be called back like that, right? That makes sense. This doesn't equate to all debt being bad or all debt being risky. It just equates Dave's plan to being extremely stupid, which he admits it was, but it doesn't exclude the legitimacy of any other plan outside of Dave's plan. This is kind of a logical fallacy called appeal to the stone, where you kind of say like, this thing is dumb, it's obviously absurd, but you give no supporting arguments for it. So in his case, he's giving a supporting argument, but he's not giving an argument against the entirety of his statement, right? So the entirety of his statement is debt's bad, don't take out debt, right? And then instead of proving that debt's bad, what he's doing is he's proving this one case is bad. That's it. So he's leaving the rest of it here for us to just assume that this is the case.
Because everything I was taught, I grew up in the real estate business. And when you're in the real estate business as a profession, one of the rules is they take your risk meter out and they sit on the table and they break it. So you have no ability to perceive risk because everything's good, everything's going up, and it always works. And the mythology that just because something worked once, it's always going to work every time. So
taking that argument, it would stand to reason that maybe we should just rebuild the risk meter. Maybe we should start calculating risk, right? So he's saying like, we don't calculate risk in real estate and that caused me to be destroyed. And so no more debt, right? Maybe the obvious answer is let's build a risk meter.
I had to go through kind of a healing of my heart in that regard and go, oh, wait a minute, this is risk. Wait a minute, OPM, other people's money. Yeah, it's kind of got that get-rich-quick slimy vibe to it, and all that. But there are people that more intelligently than that, use debt. And so there's a spectrum there.
Hey, that's what I say. There's a spectrum. So Dave admits it. There's a spectrum. He's endorsed the wealthy idiots. That's it. unsubscribe from Dave, subscribe to the Wealthy Idiots. It's all you need from here on out. Dave endorsed us. No reason to watch them anymore. So basically, this is the way that you should probably consider it. Is you figure out like what is the amount of risk and also what is the amount of return. Then you figure out ways to mitigate that risk. So that could be things like, emergency funds specifically for your property or other assets in case that property reduces in value and you are stuck trying to sell it or trying to recover value somehow. There are ways to mitigate that. And then once you kind of figure out what your risk is and what your return is, it gives you enough information to decide, like, does this make sense? You could also, still taking out a loan, like, in my previous example, instead of 25%, maybe you go 50%. So less risky. That would mean that the housing market would have to drop 50% for you to be in a place where you're in trouble. Right? And 2008 kind of did that for like a blip, and then it came back pretty quickly. Just within the next year or two, like you would have had your value back pretty fast. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal. And even Dave says now, like there shouldn't be any case where values go down that tremendously. It just shouldn't happen. But even if it did, let's say we had 50% loan on that, and we bought other assets. So we have plenty of buffer. So we have very little risk, but we're also getting a much, much higher return than if we went all cash in. Seems like that's how we should be thinking of this.
But even those are taking on risk.
Interesting. So he makes sure to clarify at the back end there that debt is still always taking on risk. So risk is the thing that we're trying to avoid at all costs. That's important to note because he's going to say something in a minute. So keep that in the back of your mind.
Buffett says when the tide goes out, you can tell who's skinny dipping. So when you stress test with an economic problem of some kind, outside variable or inside variable, inside your organization or your life, inside your portfolio, or the economy, like a quarantine type thing comes up, or inflation or recession, and you stress test your theories, you can tell who's skinny dipping.
So he answered his own question, right? He's like, there's risk. We don't calculate risk in real estate. It's not there. You could stress test it and you'll see who's skinny dipping. All right, well, let's stress test our theories and then make sure that we're ready for any event like that to happen. In fact, I wonder if there's like an event that occurred recently, like maybe circa 2008, that we could use to try and determine if we're doing safe things in the real estate market. If only there was an event like that. Sounds like Dave gave us the answer. We already know it.
And if your theories don't last. And so the only one I've ever found, and this comes back to my faith journeys where it started, the borrower is slave to the lender, I can find nowhere in Scripture that debt was used to bless people.
So can you see what's happening yet? I know that I'm pausing a lot and I'm telling you a lot of stuff, but can you see what's happening with his arguments here? He's kind of going around in these circles. Like he's not really landing on the thing that he should be explaining to us. Like, why is Graham Stephan, like, why should he not be doing what he's doing? Why should AJ not be doing what he's doing? Like, he's not hitting on any of that. He's just talking all the way around it, right? And then in this one, it bugs me a little bit because he's right. There's nowhere in Scripture that says, like, this is how to use debt correctly in order to make a bunch of money. But it also doesn't say anywhere that debt is inherently bad, immoral, or evil. It doesn't say that anywhere. In fact, the only thing it gives us is what Dave constantly talks about, which is the warning that debt, the debtor is slave to the lender, meaning that, like, be very careful with debt because if you're not, you're in trouble, right? That's essentially what's happening. It's a warning telling us to be careful with debt. That's the only thing you can find. So it's interesting that he goes there and he still can't really nail down, this no debt philosophy that he has. Like, it's still not even in the Bible.
I've got a degree in finance, and I know how to run an IRR, and I know what the IRR looks like with debt and without debt. And it's not nearly as good unless you're leveraged. But you can run an IRR through the roof with leverage. Mm-hmm. Guess what's left out of the IRR calculation? There's no math inserted for risk.
Ooh. So IRR stands for internal rate of return, and it's the calculation used to measure the effectiveness of a particular investment. So we kind of did an example on the show, and I'll link to it this side, link to it up above, and where we kind of showed that it is possible to have like infinite money returns in real estate, that you never like you don't have to put your own money in, and you could effectively pull money out until forever. And that's essentially what he was doing originally. But at the end of the video, or the second half of that video, we went over the risks involved in doing it that way, because there are risks involved in doing it that way, right? So he's not wrong. The IRR looks great. It does not consider risk, and you could essentially print your own money using real estate. But yeah, that comes with a lot of risk, and we don't recommend doing that either.
And so while you see this great rate of return, there's zero risk showing up in there. The chance that you lose the thing, or the chance that the stress brings on your life, or what it does to your marriage, or what it does to your body to carry around the weight of that. None of that is parlayed into there. And real estate is unique in that way because other investment vehicles teach us to mathematically insert risk. For instance, two mutual funds, you would never compare an aggressive growth stock mutual fund with a growth in income, okay? And if you look at the chart, the growth in income is kind of like this, and the aggressive growth is like this, right? And that's the risk factor.
Like so for the first half of that, I often talk about how like Dave, he considers risk, or Dave considers debt the worst possible thing, because that's the thing that destroyed his financial plan. It broke his family. Like, it was a stress on him that ended up ruining his body. But I've also pointed out, like, what about the stresses of being dependent on a specific job? Right? Like, what if that's your only source of income? And if the economy starts to dive and you have no other source of income, what are you going to do? Right? And he encourages people essentially to become house poor, buying houses, because he's like, that's an investment, but then you can't take out debt against your house if you need it, and you can't refinance it, and you can't, and he tells you to pay it off early. So you're kind of, in his plan, you're kind of all dependent on a single employer. And that comes with an amount of risk and tension, and it could destroy your family as well. So there are a lot of things that could happen in this world that could cause that stress on you. And he picks one, but doesn't really address the others. So that's always bothered me. Right? Like, you got to look at the whole picture there and look at everything in order to determine, what's the proper plan? Like, what's the thing we should be stressing about, and when? The second thing I want to point out is the second half, and I told you to remember the fact that he said debt is risk, and then he just said mutual funds have risk and we can measure the risk. Right? So it turns out that Dave does buy things with risk. So risk isn't the thing to avoid at all costs, as it turns out. And I understand that mutual funds and real estate is not the same, but it's kind of on Dave to explain the difference between the two risks then, right? It's not my job. I'm not the one who claimed that. He's the one who claimed that. But he's also making an argument for what I'm saying and what I'm going to say at the end of this video as to what should be done. And we'll get there. I don't want to give it all away yet.
And the highs and lows on that, y'all probably know this is called, for our audience at home, the rapid change is measured by a thing called a beta. And a beta is a statistical measure of risk. It's a math number. And so a beta of 1.0, for those at home, means that particular mutual fund is exactly what the stock market is. It's S&P 500. It's doing what the stock market's doing. A beta of 2.0, it means it's twice as risky. So this is an aggressive growth, emerging market type stock fund portfolio. And so it's twice as risky as the market. So the way you would adjust for risk between a beta of a 0.8, which might be like a growth in income, versus a beta of 2.0, is you insert the beta in an inverse in the math formula, and you adjust for risk so you can compare these two apples to apples, even though after risk, a post-risk analysis. We don't do that in real estate. No one ever talks about that in real estate. It doesn't even come up. And so but we have kind of a brain, and our brain says, oh, wait a minute, if I'm 110% leveraged in real estate, that's probably not good,
That's the end of the video. So Dave right there gave us one of the most strong endorsements that I think anybody could possibly give. He just made an incredible argument for using debt to invest, as long as you're calculating and considering the risk or the worst case scenarios, which is what we talk about here on this channel. Take what you have, what your plan is. Now, what would happen with your plan in an event like 2008? Like, the housing values dropped. Your stocks dropped in value. You couldn't get as much income because rents dropped, right? If that all occurred, what would your position look like? Would you still be able to float it? Would you have enough assets, even though they dropped, like maybe in the S&P 500 index funds? Would you have assets there that you could use? Do you have cash there that could float you for like a year? Because, stuff started coming back almost immediately. When you dollar cost average, it only took people like 6 to 8 months to bounce back when they were dollar cost averaging, right? So the risk is basically, can you survive a year if that were to occur? Right? And that's just then. So maybe we extend it. So we're like, if you could survive a year in 2008, maybe we say we want to be able to survive 2 years. And instead of a 50% drop, we're going to calculate a 75% drop. How would that look? And if you still look good, it turns out that maybe it's a good investment and the return still looks good. Because at some point, the return stops looking as good, right? Like if you were to put 25% down on the real estate, you would get 16% returns if you have like an average of 4% appreciation. But if you put 50% down, you only get 8% returns, right? So if you put 100% down, you only got 4% returns. You see how that works? So if we're going to put 50% down, then we got to start considering things like, is the cash flow going to be good enough? And combining the cash flow with the expected appreciation, maybe our investment looks like a 12% return. Is it worth 12% return to put all this effort in when the index funds right now are at like 11.5 on average per year? Like maybe not. Maybe we just go index funds. But if you do all the work, you figure out how to be safe, you put it all in, and you're like, oh, this is a 21% return and I'm safe. Well, now that's significant. That's like 10% above the index funds, above the S&P 500. It might become worth it. But all of that has to do with what Dave just argued for so passionately, which is it's okay to take risk if the risk is calculated and thought through, which is what we argue here on this channel. So thank you, Dave, for supporting the Wealthy Idiots. We super appreciate it. We hope you like and subscribe. And I'm talking to Dave here. Please like and subscribe to the Wealthy Idiots. And I don't know, maybe we'll change his mind at some point, but probably not.